The Yosemite by John Muir. Chapter 13. In the wild gold years of 1849 and '50, the Indian tribes along the western Sierra foothills became alarmed at the sudden invasion of their acorn orchard and game fields by miners, and soon began to make war upon them, in their usual murdering, plundering style. This continued until the United States Indian Commissioners succeeded in gathering them into reservations, some peacefully, others by burning their villages and stores of food. The Yosemite or grizzly bear tribe, fancying themselves secure in their deep mountain stronghold, were the most troublesome and defiant of all, and it was while the Mariposa Battalion, under command of Major Savage, was trying to capture this warlike tribe and conduct them to the Fresno Reservation that their deep mountain home, the Yosemite Valley, was discovered. From a camp on the South Fork of the Merced, Major Savage sent Indian runners to the bands who were supposed to be hiding in the mountains, instructing them to tell the Indians that if they would come in and make treaty with the commissioners, they would be furnished with food and clothing and be protected. But if they did not come in, he would make war upon them and kill them all. None of the Yosemite Indians responded to this general message, but when a special messenger was sent to the chief, he appeared the next day. He came entirely alone, and stood in dignified silence before one of the guards, until invited to enter the camp. He was recognized by one of the friendly Indians as Tenaya, the old chief of the Grizzlies, and after he had been supplied with food, Major Savage, with the aid of Indian interpreters, informed him of the wishes of the commissioners. But the old chief was very suspicious of Savage, and feared that he was taking this method of getting the tribe into his power for the purpose of revenging his personal wrong. Savage told him if he would go to the commissioners and make peace with them, as the other tribes had done, there would be no war. Tenaya inquired what was the object of taking all the Indians to the San Joaquin Plain. "My people," he said, "do not want anything from the Great Father you tell me about. The Great Spirit is our Father, and he has always supplied us with all we need. We do not want anything from white men. Our women are able to do our work. Go then, let us remain in the mountains where we were born, where the ashes of our fathers have been given to the wind. I have said enough." To this the major answered abruptly in Indian style, "If you and your people have all you desire, why do you steal our horses and mules? Why do you rob the miners' camps? Why do you murder the white men and plunder and burn their houses?" Tenaya was silent for some time. He evidently understood what the major had said, for he replied, "My young men have sometimes taken horses and mules from the whites. This is wrong. Is it not wrong to take the property of enemies who have wronged my people? My young men believe that the gold diggers were our enemies. We know that they were not, and we shall be glad to live in peace with them. We will stay here and be friends. My people do not want to go to the plains. Some of the tribes who have gone there are very bad. We cannot live with them. Here we can defend ourselves." To that Major Savage firmly said, "Your people must go to the commissioners. If they do not, your young men will again steal horses and kill and plunder the whites. It was your people who robbed my stores, burned my houses, and murdered my men. If they do not make a treaty, your whole tribe will be destroyed. Not one of them will be left alive." To this the old chief replied, "It is useless to talk to you about who destroyed your property and killed your people. I am old, and you can kill me if you will, but it is useless to lie to you who know more than all the Indians. Therefore I will not lie to you, but if you will let me return to my people, I will bring them in." He was allowed to go. The next day he came back, and said his people were on the way to our camp to go with the men sent by the Great Father, who was so good and rich. Another day passed, but no Indians from the deep valley appeared. The old chief said that the snow was so deep his village was so far down that it took a long time to climb out of it. After waiting still another day, the expedition started for the valley. When Tenaya was questioned as to the route and distance, he said that the snow was so deep that the horses could not go through it. Old Tenaya was taken along as guide. When the party had gone about halfway to the valley, they met the 72 of them, and when the old chief was asked what had become of the rest of his band, he replied, "This is all of my people that are willing to go with me to the plains. All the rest have gone with their wives and children over the mountains, to the Mono and Tuolumne tribes." Savage told Tenaya that he was not telling the truth, for Indians could not cross the mountains in the deep snow, and that he knew they must still be in his village or hiding somewhere near it. The tribe had been estimated to number over 200. Major Savage then said to him, "You may return to your camp with your people, and I will take one of your young men with me to your village to see your people who will not come. They will come if I find them." "You will not find any of my people there," said Tenaya. "I do not know where they are. My tribe is small. Many of the people of my tribe have come from other tribes, and if they go to the plains and are seen, they will be killed by the friends of those with whom they have quarreled. I was told that I was growing old, and it was well that I should go, but that young and strong men can find plenty in the mountains. Therefore, why should they go to the hot plains, to be penned up like horses and cattle? My heart has been sore since that talk, but I am now willing to go, for it is best for my people." Pushing ahead, taking turns and breaking a way through the snow, they arrived in sight of the great valley early in the afternoon, and, guided by one of Tenaya's Indians, descended by the same route as that followed by the Mariposa Trail, and the weary party went into camp on the river bank opposite El Capitan. After supper, seated around a big fire, the wonderful valley became the topic of conversation, and Dr. Bunnell suggested giving it a name. Many were proposed, but after a vote had been taken, the name Yosemite, proposed by Dr. Bunnell, was adopted almost unanimously to perpetuate the name of the tribe who so long had made their homes there. The Indian name of the valley, however, is Ahwahnee. The Indians had names for all the different rocks and streams of the valley, but very few of them are now used by the whites, Pohono, the Bridal Veil, being the principal one. The expedition remained only 1 day and 2 nights in the valley, hurrying out on the approach of a storm, and reached the South Fork headquarters on the evening of the 3rd day after starting out. Thus in the 3 days the round trip had been made to the valley, most of it had been explored in a general way, and some of its principal features had been named. But the Indians had fled up the Tenaya Canyon Trail, and none of them were seen, except an old woman unable to follow the fugitives. A second expedition was made in the same year under command of Major Bowling. When the valley was entered, no Indians were seen, but the many wigwams with smoldering fires showed that they had been hurriedly abandoned that very day. Later, 5 young Indians who had been left to watch the movements of the expedition were captured at the foot of the 3 brothers after a lively chase. 3 of the 5 were sons of the old chief, and the rock was named for them. All of these captives made good their escape within a few days, except the youngest, the son of Tenaya, who was shot by his guard while trying to escape. That same day the old chief was captured on the cliff in the east side of Indian Canyon by some of Bowling's scouts. As Tenaya walked towards the camp, his eye fell upon the dead body of his favorite son. Captain Bowling, through the interpreter, expressed his regret at the occurrence, but not a word did Tenaya utter in reply. Later, he made attempt to escape, but was caught as he was about to swim across the river. Tenaya expected to be shot for his attempt, and when brought into the presence of Captain Bowling, he said in great emotion, "Kill me, Sir Captain, yes, kill me as you killed my son, as you would kill my people if they were to come to you. You would kill all my tribe if you had the power. Yes, Sir America, you can now tell your warriors to kill the old chief. You have made my life dark with sorrow. You killed the child of my heart. Why not kill the father? But wait a little, and when I am dead I will call my people to come, and they shall hear me in their sleep, and come to avenge the death of their chief and his son. Yes, Sir America, my spirit will make trouble for you and your people, as you have made trouble for me and my people. With the wizards I will follow the white people and make them fear me. You may kill me, Sir Captain, but you shall not live in peace. I will follow you in your footsteps. I will not leave my home, but be with the spirits among the rocks, the waterfalls, in the rivers and in the winds. Wherever you go, I will be with you. You will not see me, but you will fear the spirit of the old chief and grow cold. The Great Spirit has spoken. I am done." This expedition finally captured the remnants of the tribes at the head of Lake Tenaya and took them to the Fresno Reservation, together with their chief, Tenaya. But after a short stay, they were allowed to return to the valley under restrictions. Tenaya promised faithfully to conform to everything required, joyfully left the hot and dry reservation, and with his family returned to his Yosemite home. The following year, a party of miners was attacked by the Indians in the valley, and 2 of them were killed. This led to another Yosemite expedition. A detachment of regular soldiers from Fort Miller under Lieutenant Moore, USA, was at once dispatched to capture or punish the murderers. Lieutenant Moore entered the valley in the night and surprised and captured a party of 5 Indians. But an alarm was given, and Tenaya and his people fled from their huts and escaped to the Monos, on the east side of the range. On examination of the 5 prisoners in the morning, it was discovered that each of them had some article of clothing that belonged to the murdered men. The 2 bodies of the 2 miners were found and buried on the edge of the Bridal Veil Meadow. When the captives were accused of the murder of the 2 white men, they admitted that they had killed them to prevent white men from coming to their valley, declaring that it was their home and that white men had no right to come there without their consent. Lieutenant Moore told them through his interpreter that they had sold their lands to the government, that it belonged to the white men now, and that they had agreed to live on the reservation provided for them. To this they replied that Tenaya had never consented to the sale of their valley and had never received pay for it. The other chief, they said, had no right to sell their territory. The lieutenant, being fully satisfied that he had captured the real murderers, promptly pronounced judgment and had them placed in line and shot. Lieutenant Moore pursued the fugitives to Mono, but was not successful in finding any of them. After being hospitably entertained and protected by the Mono and Paiute tribes, they stole a number of stolen horses from their entertainers and made their way by a long, obscure route by the head of the North Fork of the San Joaquin, reaching their Yosemite home once more. But early one morning, after a feast of horseflesh, a band of Monos surprised them in their huts, killing Tenaya and nearly all of his tribe. Only a small remnant escaped down the river canyon. The Tenaya Canyon and lake are named for the famous old chief. Very few visits were made to the valley before the summer of 1855, when Mr. J. M. Hutchings, having heard of its wonderful scenery, collected a party and made the first regular tourist visit to the Yosemite, and in his North California magazine described it in articles illustrated by a good artist, who was taken into the valley by him for that purpose. This first party was followed by another from Mariposa the next year, consisting of 16 or 18 persons. The next year the regular pleasure travel began, and a trail on the Mariposa side of the valley was opened by Mann Brothers. This trail was afterwards purchased by the citizens of the county and was made free to the public. The first house built in the Yosemite Valley was erected in the autumn of 1856 and was kept as a hotel the next year by G. A. Hite and later by J. H. Neal and S. M. Cunningham. It was situated directly opposite the Yosemite Fall. A little over a half-mile further up the valley, a canvas house was put up in 1858 by G. A. Hite. Next year, a frame house was built and kept as a hotel by Mr. Peck, afterwards by Mr. Longhurst, and since 1865 by Mr. Hutchings. All these hotels have vanished except the frame house built in 1859, which has been changed beyond recognition. A large hotel built on the brink of the river in front of the old one is now the only hotel in the valley. A large hotel built by the state and located farther up the valley was burned. To provide for the overflow of visitors, there are 3 camps with board floors, wood frame, and covered with canvas. Well furnished, some of them with electric light. A large first-class hotel is very much needed. Travel of late years has been rapidly increasing, especially after the establishment by Act of Congress in 1890 of the Yosemite National Park and the recession in 1905 of the original reservation to the federal government by the state. The greatest increase, of course, was caused by the construction of the Yosemite Valley Railroad from Merced to the border of the park, 8 miles below the valley. It is 80 miles long, and the entire distance, except the first 24 miles from the town of Merced, is built through the precipitous Merced River Canyon. The roadbed was virtually blasted out of the solid rock for the entire distance in the canyon. Work was begun in September 1905, and the first train entered El Portal, the terminus, April 15, 1907. Many miles of the road cost as much as $100,000 per mile. Its business has increased from 4,000 tourists in the first year it was operated to 15,000 in 1910. End of section 13.
Yosemite by John Muir. Chapter 14. Lamon. The good old pioneer, Lamon, was the first of all the Yosemite settlers who cordially and unreservedly adopted the valley as his home. He was born in the Shenandoah Valley, Virginia, May 10, 1817, emigrated to Illinois with his father, John Lamon, at the age of 19, afterwards went to Texas and settled on the Brazos, where he raised melons and hunted alligators for a living. Right interesting business, he said, especially the alligator part of it. From the Brazos he went to the Comanche Indian country between Gonzales and Austin, 20 miles from his nearest neighbour. During the first summer, the only bread he had was the breast meat of wild turkeys. When the formidable Comanche Indians were on the warpath, he left his cabin after dark and slept in the woods. From Texas he crossed the plains to California and worked in the Calaveras and Mariposa goldfields. He first heard Yosemite spoken of as a very beautiful mountain valley, and after making 2 excursions in the summers of 1857 and 1858 to see the wonderful place, he made up his mind to quit roving and make a permanent home in it. In April 1859, he moved into it, located a garden opposite the half dome, set out a lot of apple, pear and peach trees, planted potatoes, etc. that he packed in on a contrary old mule, and worked for his board in building a hotel which was afterwards purchased by Mr. Hutchings. His neighbours thought he was very foolish in attempting to raise crops in so high and cold a valley, and warned him that he could raise nothing and sell nothing, and would surely starve. For the first year or 2, a lack of provisions compelled him to move out on the approach of winter, but in 1862, after he had succeeded in raising some fruit and vegetables, he began to winter in the valley. The first winter he had no companions, not even a dog or cat, and one evening was greatly surprised to see 2 men coming up the valley. They were very glad to see him, for they had come from Mariposa in search of him, a report having been spread that he had been killed by Indians. He assured his visitors that he felt safer in his Yosemite home, lying snug and squirrel-like in his 10 by 12 cabin, than in Mariposa. When the avalanches began to slip, he wondered where all the wild roaring and booming came from, the flying snow preventing them from being seen. But, upon the whole, he wondered most at the brightness, gentleness and sunniness of the weather, and hopefully employed the calm days in tearing ground for an orchard and vegetable garden. In the second winter, he built a winter cabin under the Royal Arches where he enjoyed more sunshine. But no matter how he praised the weather, he could not induce anyone to winter with him until 1864. He liked to describe the Great Flood of 1867, the year before I reached California, when all the walls were striped with thundering waterfalls. He was a fine, erect, whole-souled man, between 6 and 7 feet high, with a broad open face, bland and guileless as his pet oxen. No stranger to hunger and weariness, he knew well how to appreciate suffering of a like kind in others, and many there be, myself among the number, who can testify to his simple, unostentatious kindness that found expression in 1,000 small deeds. After gaining sufficient means to enjoy a long afternoon of life in comparative affluence and ease, he died in the autumn of 1876. He sleeps in a beautiful spot near Gailen Clark, and a monument hewn from a block of Yosemite granite marks his grave. End of chapter. Yosemite by John Muir. Chapter 15. Gailen Clark. Gailen Clark was the best mountaineer I ever met, and one of the kindest and most amiable of all my mountain friends. I first met him at his Wawona ranch 43 years ago on my first visit to Yosemite. I had entered the valley with one companion by way of Coulterville, and returned by what was then known as the Mariposa Trail. Both trails were buried in deep snow where the elevation was from 5,000 to 7,000 feet above sea level in the sugar pine and silver fir regions. We had no great difficulty, however, in finding our way by the trends of the main features of the topography. Botanizing by the way, we made slow, plodding progress, and were again about out of provisions when we reached Clark's hospitable cabin at Wawona. He kindly furnished us with flour and a little sugar and tea, and my companion, who complained of the benumbing poverty of a strictly vegetarian diet, gladly accepted Mr. Clark's offer of a piece of a bear that had just been killed. After a short talk about bears and the forests and the way to the big trees, we pushed on up through the Wawona firs and sugar pines and camped in the now famous Mariposa Grove. Later, after making my home in the Yosemite Valley, I became well acquainted with Mr. Clark while he was guardian. He was elected again and again to this important office by different boards of commissioners on account of his efficiency and his real love of the valley. Although nearly all my mountaineering has been done without companions, I had the pleasure of having Gailen Clark with me on 3 excursions. About 35 years ago, I invited him to accompany me on a trip through the Big Tuolumne Canyon from Hetchy Valley. The canyon up to that time had not been explored, and knowing that the difference in the elevation of the river at the head of the canyon and in Hetchy was about 5,000 feet, we expected to find some magnificent cataracts or falls, nor were we disappointed. When we were leaving Yosemite, an ambitious young man begged leave to join us. I strongly advised him not to attempt such a long, hard trip, for it would undoubtedly prove very trying to an inexperienced climber. He assured us, however, that he was equal to anything, gladly meet every difficulty as it came, and cause us no hindrance or trouble of any sort. So at last, after repeating our advice that he give up the trip, we consented to his joining us. We entered the canyon by way of Hetchy Valley, each carrying his own provisions and making his own tea, porridge, bed, etc. In the morning of the second day out from Hetchy, we came to what is now known as Muir Gorge, and Mr. Clark without hesitation prepared to force a way through it, wading and jumping from one submerged boulder to another through the torrent, bracing and steadying himself with a long pole. Though the river was then rather low, the savage, roaring, surging song it was ringing was rather nerve-trying, especially to our inexperienced companion. With careful assistance, however, I managed to get him through, but this hard trial, naturally enough, proved too much, and he informed us, pale and trembling, that he could go no farther. I gathered some wood at the upper throat of the gorge, made a fire for him and advised him to feel at home and make himself comfortable, hoped he would enjoy the grand scenery and the songs of the water ouzels which haunted the gorge, and assured him that we would return some time in the night, though it might be late, as we wished to go on through the entire canyon if possible. We pushed our way through the dense chaparral and over the earthquake talus with such speed that we reached the foot of the upper cataract while we still had an hour or so of daylight for the return trip. It was long after dark when we reached our adventurous but nerve-shaken companion, who, of course, was anxious and lonely, not being accustomed to solitude, however kindly and flowery and full of sweet birdsong and stream song. Being tired, we simply lay down in restful comfort on the riverbank beside a good fire, instead of trying to go down the gorge in the dark or climb over its high shoulder to our blankets and provisions, which we had left in the morning in a tree at the foot of the gorge. I remember Mr. Clark remarking that if he had his choice that night between provisions and blankets, he would have chosen his blankets. The next morning, in about an hour, we had crossed over the ridge through which the gorge is cut, reached our provisions, made tea, and had a good breakfast. As soon as we had returned to Yosemite, I obtained fresh provisions, pushed off alone up to the head of Yosemite Creek Basin, entered the canyon by a side canyon, and completed the exploration up to the Tuolumne Meadows. It was on this first trip from Hetchy to the upper cataracts that I had convincing proofs of Mr. Clark's daring and skill as mountaineer, particularly in fording torrents, and in forcing his way through thick chaparral. I found it somewhat difficult to keep up with him in dense, tangled brush, though in jumping on boulder taluses and slippery cobble beds, I had no difficulty in leaving him behind. After I had discovered the glaciers on Mount Lyell and Mount McClure, Mr. Clark kindly made a second excursion with me to assist in establishing a line of stakes across the McClure Glacier to measure its rate of flow. On this trip, we also climbed Mount Lyell together, when the snow which covered the glacier was melted into up-leaning icy blades, which were extremely difficult to cross, not being strong enough to support our weight nor wide enough apart to enable us to stride across each blade as it was met. Here again, I, being lighter, had no difficulty in keeping ahead of him. While resting after wearisome staggering and falling, he stared at the marvellous ranks of leaning blades and said, "I think I've travelled all sorts of trails and canyons, through all kinds of brush and snow, but this gets me." Mr. Clark, at my urgent request, joined my small party on a trip to the Kings River Yosemite by way of the high mountains, most of the way without a trail. He joined us at the Mariposa Big Tree Grove, and intended to go all the way, but finding that, on account of the difficulties encountered, the time required was much greater than he expected, he turned back near the head of the North Fork of the Kings River. In cooking his mess of oatmeal porridge and making tea, his pot was always the first to boil, and I used to wonder why, with all his skill in scrambling through brush in the easiest way and preparing his meals, he was so utterly careless about his beds. He would lie down anywhere on any ground, rough or smooth, without taking pains even to remove cobbles or sharp-angled rocks protruding through the grass or gravel, saying that his own bones were as hard as any stones and could do him no harm. His kindness to all Yosemite visitors and mountaineers was marvellously constant and uniform. He was not a good businessman, and in building an extensive hotel and barns at Wawona, before the travel to Yosemite had been greatly developed, he borrowed money, mortgaged his property, and lost it all. Though not the first to see the Mariposa Big Tree Grove, he was the first to explore it, after he had heard from a prospector who had passed through the grove and who gave him the indefinite information that there were some wonderful big trees up there on the top of the Wawona Hill, and that he believed they must be of the same kind that had become so famous and well known in the Calaveras Grove further north. On this information, Gailen Clark told me, he went up and thoroughly explored the grove, counting the trees and measuring the largest, and becoming familiar with it. He stated also that he had explored the forest to the southward, and had discovered the much larger Fresno Grove of about 2 square miles, 6 or 7 miles distant from the Mariposa Grove. Unfortunately, most of the Fresno Grove has been cut and flumed down to the railroad near Madeira. Mr. Clark was truly and literally a gentleman. I never heard him utter a hasty, angry, fault-finding word. His voice was uniformly pitched at a rather low tone, perfectly even, although glances of his eyes and slight intonations of his voice often indicated that something funny or mildly sarcastic was coming, but upon the whole he was serious and industrious. And, however deep and fun-provoking a story might be, he never indulged in boisterous laughter. He was very fond of scenery, and once told me after I became acquainted with him that he liked nothing in the world better than climbing to the top of a high ridge or mountain and looking off. He preferred the mountain ridges and domes in the Yosemite regions on account of the wealth and beauty of the forests, Oftentimes he would take his rifle, a few pounds of bacon, a few pounds of flour, and a single blanket, and go off hunting, for no other reason than to explore and get acquainted with the most beautiful points of view within a journey of a week or two from his Wawona home. On these trips he was always alone, and could indulge in tranquil enjoyment of nature to his heart's content. He said that on those trips, when he was a sufficient distance from home in a neighbourhood where he wished to linger, he always shot a deer, sometimes a grouse, and occasionally a bear. After diminishing the weight of a deer or bear by eating part of it, he carried as much as possible of the best of the meat to Wawona, and from his hospitable, well-supplied cabin no weary wanderer ever went away hungry or unrested. The value of the mountain air in prolonging life is well exemplified in Mr. Clark's case. While working in the mines, he contracted a severe cold that settled on his lungs and finally caused severe inflammation and bleeding, and none of his friends thought he would ever recover. The physicians told him he had but a short time to live. It was then that he repaired to the beautiful sugar pine woods at Wawona and took up a claim, including the fine meadows there, and building his cabin, began his life of wandering and exploring in the glorious mountains about him, usually going bareheaded. In a remarkably short time his lungs were healed. He was one of the most sincere tree lovers I ever knew. About 20 years before his death he made choice of a plot in the Yosemite Cemetery on the north side of the valley, not far from the Yosemite Fall, and selecting a dozen or so of seedling sequoias in the Mariposa Grove, he brought them to the valley and planted them around the spot he had chosen for his last rest. The ground there is gravelly and dry. By careful watering, he finally nursed most of the seedlings into good thrifty trees, and doubtless they will long shade the grave of their blessed lover and friend. End of chapter.
The Yosemite by John Muir. Section 25, Chapter 16, Hetchy Valley. Yosemite is so wonderful that we are apt to regard it as an exceptional creation, the only valley of its kind in the world. But nature is not so poor as to have only one of anything. Several other Yosemites have been discovered in the Sierra that occupy the same relative positions on the range, and were formed by the same forces in the same kind of granite. One of these, the Hetchy Valley, is in the Yosemite National Park, about 20 miles from Yosemite, and is easily accessible to all sorts of travelers by a road and trail that leaves the Big Oak Flat Road at Bronson Meadows a few miles below Crane Flat, and to mountaineers by way of Yosemite Creek Basin and the head of the middle fork of the Tuolumne. It is said to have been discovered by Joseph Screech, a hunter, in 1850, a year before the discovery of the Great Yosemite. After my first visit to it in the autumn of 1871, I have always called it the Tuolumne Yosemite, for it is a wonderfully exact counterpart of the Merced Yosemite, not only in its sublime rocks and waterfalls, but in the gardens, groves, and meadows of its flowery park-like floor. The floor of Yosemite is about 4,000 feet above the sea, the Hetchy floor about 3,700 feet. And, as the Merced River flows through Yosemite, so does the Tuolumne through Hetchy. The walls of both are gray granite, rise abruptly from the floor, and are sculpted in the same style, and, in both, every rock is a glacier monument. Standing boldly out from the south wall is a strikingly picturesque rock, called by the Indians Colana, the outermost of a group 2,300 feet high, corresponding with the cathedral rocks of Yosemite, both in relative position and form. On the opposite side of the valley, facing Colana, there is a counterpart of the El Capitan that rises sheer and plain to a height of 1,800 feet, and over its massive brow flows a stream which makes the most graceful fall I have ever seen. From the edge of the cliff to the top of an earthquake talus, it is perfectly free in the air for 1,000 feet before it is broken into cascades among talus boulders. It is in all its glory in June, when the snow is melting fast, but fades and vanishes toward the end of summer. The only fall I know with which it may be fairly compared is the Yosemite Bridal Veil, but it excels even that favorite fall both in height and airy-fairy beauty and behavior. Lowlanders are apt to suppose that mountain streams in their wild career over cliffs lose control of themselves and tumble in a noisy chaos of mist and spray. On the contrary, on no part of their travels are they more harmonious and self-controlled. Imagine yourself in Hetchy on a sunny day in June, standing waist-deep in grass and flowers, as I have often stood, while the great pines sway dreamily with scarcely perceptible motion. Looking northward across the valley, you see a plain gray granite cliff rising abruptly out of the gardens and groves to a height of 1,800 feet, and in front of it Tueeulala's silvery scurf burning with irised sunfire. In the first white outburst at the head there is an abundance of visible energy, but it is speedily hushed and concealed in divine repose, and its tranquil progress to the base of the cliff is like that of a downy feather in a still room. Now observe the fineness and marvelous distinctness of the various sun-illumined fabrics into which the water is woven. They sift and float from form to form down the face of that grand gray rock in so leisurely and unconfused a manner that you can imagine their texture and patterns and tones of color as you would a piece of embroidery held in the hand. Toward the top of the fall you see groups of booming, comet-like masses, their solid white heads separate, their tails like combed silk interlacing among delicate gray and purple shadows, ever forming and dissolving, worn out by friction in their rush through the air. Most of these vanish a few hundred feet below the summit, changing to varied forms of cloud-like drapery. Near the bottom, the width of the fall has increased from about 25 feet to 100 feet. Here it is composed of yet finer tissues, and is still without a trace of disorder, air, water, and sunlight woven into stuff that spirits might wear. So fine a fall might well seem sufficient to glorify any valley, but here, as in Yosemite, nature seems in nowise moderate. For a short distance to the eastward of Tueeulala booms and thunders the great Hetchy Fall, Wapama, so near that you have both of them in full view from the same standpoint. It is the counterpart of the Yosemite Fall, but has a much greater volume of water, is about 1,700 feet in height, and appears to be nearly vertical, though considerably inclined, and is dashed into huge outbounding bosses of foam on projecting shelves and knobs. No two falls could be more unlike, Tueeulala out in the open sunshine descending like thistledown, Wapama in a jagged shadowy gorge roaring and plundering, pounding its way like an earthquake avalanche. Besides this glorious pair, there is a broad, massive fall on the main river, a short distance above the head of the valley. Its position is something like that of the Vernal in Yosemite, and its roar as it plunges into a surging trout pool may be heard a long way, though it is only about 20 feet high. On Rancheria Creek, a large stream, corresponding in position with the Yosemite Tenaya Creek, there is a chain of cascades joined here and there with swift flashing plumes, like the one between the Vernal and Nevada Falls, making magnificent shows as they go their glacier-sculptured way, sliding, leaping, hurrahing, covered with crisp, clashing spray made glorious with sifting sunshine. And besides all these, a few small streams come over the walls at wide intervals, leaping from ledge to ledge with bird-like song and watering many a hidden cliff garden and fernery. But they are too unshowy to be noticed in so grand a place. The correspondence between the Hetchy walls in their trends, sculpture, physical structure, and general arrangement of the main rock masses and those of the Yosemite Valley has excited the wondering admiration of every observer. We have seen that the El Capitan and Cathedral rocks occupy the same relative positions in both valleys. So also do their Yosemite points and north domes. Again, that part of the Yosemite north wall immediately to the east of the Yosemite Fall has two horizontal benches, about 500 and 1,500 feet above the floor, timbered with golden cup oak. Two benches similarly situated and timbered occur on the same relative position of the Hetchy north wall, to the east of Wapama Fall, and on no other. The Yosemite is bounded at the head by the great half-dome. Hetchy is bounded in the same way, though its head rock is incomparably less wonderful and sublime in form. The floor of the valley is about 3½ miles long, and from a fourth to half a mile wide. The lower portion is mostly a level meadow about a mile long, with the trees restricted to the sides and the river banks, and partially separated from the main upper forested portion by a low bar of glacier-polished granite across which the river breaks in rapids. The principal trees are the yellow and sugar pines, digger pine, incense cedar, Douglas spruce, silver fir, the California and golden cup oaks, balsam, cottonwood, Nuttall's flowering dogwood, alder, maple, laurel, tumion, etc. The most abundant and influential are the great yellow or silver pines like those of Yosemite, the tallest over 200 feet in height, and the oaks assembled in magnificent groves with massive rugged trunks 4 to 6 feet in diameter, and broad, shady, wide-spreading heads. The shrubs forming conspicuous flowery clumps and tangles are manzanita, azalea, spirea, briar rose, several species of ceanothus, calycanthus, philadelphus, wild cherry, etc., with abundance of showy and fragrant herbaceous plants growing about them or out in the open in beds by themselves, lilies, mariposa tulips, brodiaeas, orchids, iris, spriggea, draperia, colomia, collinsia, castilleja, nemophila, larkspur, columbine, goldenrod sunflowers, mints of many species, honeysuckle, etc. Many fine ferns dwell here also, especially the beautiful and interesting rock ferns, paella, and chilianthes of several species, fringing and rosetting dry rock piles and ledges, woodwardia and asplenium on damp spots with fronds 6 or 7 feet high, the delicate maidenhair in mossy nooks by the falls, and the sturdy broad-shouldered pteris, covering nearly all the dry ground beneath the oaks and pines. It appears, therefore, that Hetchy Valley, far from being a plain, common, rock-bound meadow, as many who have not seen it seem to suppose, is a grand landscape garden, one of nature's rarest and most precious mountain temples. As in Yosemite, the sublime rocks of its walls seem to glow with life, whether leaning back in repose, or standing erect in thoughtful attitudes, giving welcome to storms and calms alike, their brows in the sky, their feet set in the groves and gay flowery meadows, while birds, bees, and butterflies help the river and waterfalls to stir all the air into music, things frail and fleeting, and types of permanence meeting here and blending, just as they do in Yosemite, to draw her lovers into close and confiding communion with her. Sad to say, this most precious and sublime feature of the Yosemite National Park, one of the greatest of all our natural resources for the uplifting joy and peace and health of the people, is in danger of being dammed and made into a reservoir to help supply San Francisco with water and light, thus flooding it from wall to wall and burying its gardens and groves 100 or 200 feet deep. This grossly destructive commercial scheme has long been planned and urged, though water as pure and abundant can be got from outside of the People's Park in a dozen different places, because of the comparative cheapness of the dam and of the territory which it is sought to divert from the great uses to which it was dedicated in the Act of 1890 establishing the Yosemite National Park. The making of gardens and parks goes on with civilization all over the world, and they increase both in size and number as their value is recognized. Everybody needs beauty as well as bread, places to play in and pray in, where nature may heal and cheer and give strength to body and soul alike. This natural beauty hunger is made manifest in the little window-sill gardens of the poor, though perhaps only by a geranium slip in a broken cup, as well as in the carefully tended rose and lily gardens of the rich, the thousands of spacious city parks and botanical gardens, and in our magnificent national parks, the Yellowstone, Yosemite, Sequoia, etc., nature's sublime wonderlands, the admiration and joy of the world. Nevertheless, like anything else worth while, from the very beginning, however well guarded, they have always been subject to attack by despoiling gain-seekers and mischief-makers of every degree, from Satan to senators, eagerly trying to make everything immediately and selfishly commercial, with schemes disguised in smug smiling philanthropy, industriously, champiously crying, "Conservation, conservation, pan-utilization," that man and beast may be fed and the dear nation made great. Thus, long ago, a few enterprising merchants utilized the Jerusalem temple as a place of business instead of a place of prayer, changing money, buying and selling cattle and sheep and doves, and earlier still, the first forest reservation, including only one tree, was likewise despoiled. Ever since the establishment of the Yosemite National Park, strife has been going on around its borders, and I suppose this will go on as part of the universal battle between right and wrong, however much its boundaries may be shorn or its wild beauty destroyed. The first application to the government by the San Francisco supervisors for the commercial use of Lake Eleanor and the Hetchy Valley was made in 1903, and on December 22nd of that year it was denied by the Secretary of the Interior, Mr. Hitchcock, who truthfully said, "Presumably the Yosemite National Park was created such by law because within its boundaries, inclusive alike of its beautiful small lakes like Eleanor and its majestic wonders like Hetchy and Yosemite Valley, it is the aggregation of such natural, scenic features that makes the Yosemite Park a wonderland which the Congress of the United States sought by law to reserve for all coming time as nearly as practicable in the condition fashioned by the hand of the Creator, a worthy object of national pride and a source of healthful pleasure and rest for the thousands of people who may annually sojourn there during the heated months." In 1907, when Mr. Garfield became Secretary of the Interior, the application was renewed and granted, but under his successor, Mr. Fisher, the matter has been referred to a commission, which, as this volume goes to press, still has it under consideration. The most delightful and wonderful campgrounds in the park are its three great valleys, Yosemite, Hetchy, and Upper Tuolumne, and they are also the most important places with reference to their positions relative to the other great features, the Merced and Tuolumne canyons, and the high Sierra peaks and glaciers, etc., at the head of the rivers. The main part of the Tuolumne Valley is a spacious flowery lawn 4 or 5 miles long, surrounded by magnificent snowy mountains, slightly separated from other beautiful meadows, which together make a series about 12 miles in length, the highest reaching to the feet of Mount Dana, Mount Gibbs, Mount Lyell, and Mount McClure. It is about 8,500 feet above the sea, and forms the Grand Central High Sierra campground from which excursions are made to the noble mountains, domes, glaciers, etc., across the range to the Mono Lake and volcanoes, and down the Tuolumne Canyon to Hetchy. Should Hetchy be submerged for a reservoir, as proposed, not only would it be utterly destroyed, but the sublime canyon way to the heart of the High Sierra would be hopelessly blocked, and the great camping ground, as the watershed of a city drinking system, virtually would be closed to the public. So far as I have learned, few of all the thousands who have seen the park and seek rest and peace in it are in favor of this outrageous scheme. One of my later visits to the valley was made in the autumn of 1907 with the late William Keith, the artist. The leaf colors were then ripe, and the great godlike rocks in repose seemed to glow with life. The artist, under their spell, wandered day after day along the river and through the groves and gardens, studying the wonderful scenery, and after making about 40 sketches, declared with enthusiasm that although its walls were less sublime in height, in picturesque beauty and charm Hetchy surpassed even Yosemite. That anyone would try to destroy such a place seems incredible, but sad experience shows that there are people good enough and bad enough for anything. The proponents of the dam scheme bring forward a lot of bad arguments to prove that the only righteous thing to do with the people's parks is to destroy them bit by bit as they are able. Their arguments are curiously like those of the devil, devised for the destruction of the first garden, So much of the very best Eden fruit going to waste, so much of the best Tuolumne water and Tuolumne scenery going to waste. Few of their statements are even partly true, and all are misleading. Thus, Hetchy, they say, is a low-lying meadow. On the contrary, it is a high-lying natural landscape garden, as the photographic illustrations show. It is a common minor feature like thousands of others. On the contrary, it is a very uncommon feature, after Yosemite, the rarest and in many ways the most important in the national park. Damming and submerging it 175 feet deep would enhance its beauty by forming a crystal-clear lake. Landscape gardens, places of recreation and worship, are never made beautiful by destroying and burying them. The beautiful sham lake, forsooth, should be only an eyesore, a dismal blot on the landscape, like many others to be seen in the Sierra. For, instead of keeping it at the same level all the year, allowing nature centuries of time to make new shores, it would of course be full only a month or two in the spring, when the snow is melting fast. Then it would be gradually drained, exposing the slimy sides of the basin and shallower parts of the bottom, with the gathered drift and waste, death and decay of the upper basins, caught here instead of being swept on to decent natural burial, along the banks of the river or in the sea. Thus the Hetchy Dam Lake would be only a rough imitation of a natural lake for a few of the spring months, an open sepulchre for the others. Hetchy water is the purest of all to be found in the Sierra, unpolluted and forever unpollutable. On the contrary, excepting that of the Merced below Yosemite, it is less pure than that of most of the other Sierra streams because of the sewage of campgrounds draining into it, especially of the Big Tuolumne Meadows campground, occupied by hundreds of tourists and mountaineers, with their animals, for months every summer, soon to be followed by thousands from all the world. These temple destroyers, devotees of ravaging commercialism, seem to have a perfect contempt for nature, and, instead of lifting their eyes to the God of the mountains, lift them to the almighty dollar. Damn Hetchy! As well damn for water tanks the people's cathedrals and churches, for no holier temple has ever been consecrated by the heart of man. End of section 16.
End of The Yosemite by John Muir.